Hello and welcome to episode number 19 on the podcast for the book The Gray Stage, written by Greg Fernandez Jr. Today we're going to cover the chapter Closing the Case, and for those following along in the book, we'll be covering pages 83 and 84 today. On the show with us, it's myself, Dan Hennen. We have Greg Fernandez Jr. on the show, and also Sophia. Well, this should be a good one. We've got a couple pages that should take the majority of the episode here to review on this chapter. It's chapter 10, called Closing the Case. And so what we'll do, like the other episodes, I will go through and read several paragraphs, and we will talk and discuss them, and then move forward and share some good, interesting stuff here on today's show. Anything before we get started, guys?
I would say the only thing for me is, right now it's like this is getting to the case where everything is kind of coming to a close. We've been asking a lot of questions, been waiting, and this is supposed to be the point where we finally get some resolution to this case. That's what we were hoping for. So that's what I was hoping to get from this. So let's see how that goes, I guess.
Yes, yeah. Very interesting, very interesting. And so once again, the bodies were found January 17th, 2015. And as we start here, we're a couple months in, and the case is pretty much closed. They're just waiting for things to come in here. But we'll see what contrast that is to what really was going on at this time. It's very different than what we're hearing here. Here is the chapter, Closing the Case. It starts off, on March 14th, 2015, detectives Brian Bone, Jim Gummert, and Sean McKnight met with Dan Crowley Sr., Kate Crowley, Dan Crowley Jr., Allison Crowley, and Sidra Alam at the Apple Valley Police Station. We presented the facts of the case to the family as of that time, Detective Bone reported. Quote, no details or information were withheld. All information was discussed, and all questions were answered to the best of our abilities, end quote. At that time, investigators were still waiting for the autopsy reports, the BCA lab results, and the contents of David's Dropbox account. It wasn't until March 24th, 2015, that Detective Brian Bone received a copy of the autopsy report. As of April 17th, 2015, Detective Bone reported, quote, I have still not received results from the BCA regarding fingerprints, and I have not heard from Dropbox, end quote. Should I stop there and discuss?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to cover there. I mean, because it's very good that on March 14th that they're meeting with David's family, with Kamel's sister. But, they say, we presented the facts of the case as of that time, but there really were no facts of the case as of that time other than what they missed, 2 bullets and a bullet hole that they actually missed. I mean, I hope they told them about those facts. I hope they told them about the whole blood writing. This may have been the first time that the family is learning about that. Possibly. I'm not really sure. I don't know if we know, and I should have double-checked on this one, when they meet with all of them, the way that it reads, I had thought that they met with Dan Crowley Sr., Dan Crowley Jr., Allison, Kate, and Sidra all at the same time, right? That's kind of the way that the police report reads.
Yes.
From what I know, so that's the way that I took it. But it's like, I mean, okay, first of all, is that the first? Obviously, they've been talking on the phone. We've talked about, all the, back on January 19th, 2015, the police did speak with everybody. They've spoken with everybody by that time. This is the first time that they're meeting them in person, but they don't really have much yet. So it's like, what are they telling them? What are they telling them? Hey, David is guilty because A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because they don't have A, B, C, D, E, F, G at this point. They're still waiting for all of this stuff here that we just talked about. They have nothing.
Greg, would it be fair to say on that quote where it says, we got everyone together and we presented the facts of the case. Would it be better if he would have said, we presented the details of the case to the family of what we know? Is it the word facts? Here is what I'm struggling with, is because you go on to say then that the big chunks of the case that were facts or related aren't even in yet. And so what facts are they talking about? And maybe he should have said, we just presented the details of what we know at that time. But I like how you laid it out that, remember, at this time, they were still waiting on a variety of reports, results, contents of the online Dropbox, all these things that they did not even have in their possession, much less review them to be able to make a statement after reviewing them on this investigation. So they got them all together, but just kind of went over the details. Now, in part, do you think that may have been that March 14th date that they talked about the Muslim angle, because the Alam family had expressed to police to keep that quiet and out of the public? Was that discussed for the first time to the Crowley family on this date, or did they know all about that as well?
I don't think that they knew about it until this time. When I spoke with Kamel's sister, it sounded like they didn't really know about a lot of this stuff. Now, maybe it's possible that they did. I know that they did not tell the family, right after the bodies were found. They definitely waited days, if not months, if not weeks, if not months, whatever. They did not tell them that had happened, that there was all of this angle, the blood writing and all of that stuff. So that was what the whole Quran. I know that they gave the Quran to Kamel's sister on March 14th. She kind of read through it, and that's where they got the whole prayer, what is this? Obviously, it's stuff they could have figured out. They didn't need her to figure out what page the Quran was actually open to, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Kamel's sister was able to verify that was Kamel's Quran and maybe give them some more details about that. But that was kind of my understanding, is that this is really the first time that the family is really learning about that. Hopefully that's wrong. Hopefully that happened on January 19th is when that should have happened, because the cops spoke with everybody from the family on that date. So by January 19th, 2015, the family should have known about the whole Quran, the whole Muslim angle, basically, the whole blood writing and all of that stuff. So.
And the other thing I'd like to get through for the listeners that may or may not be familiar, Sidra Alam lives in Texas, outside of Waco, with her parents. And this is the first time that she or any member of the Alam family comes up to Minnesota to actually be there in person since the deaths, correct? And this is almost 2 months later.
Right.
Now, the mother was receiving help for her cancer treatments and didn't even know of the killings potentially at this point. The father was spending all his time with the mother in hospice and at the hospital, and didn't have time. And so they kind of gave it to Sidra to take over, come on up to Minnesota, fly up, attend this meeting. And then on the other side, you've got Dan Crowley Sr., the dad of David, and Kate Crowley. Remember, these two were divorced, both living in Owatonna, Minnesota, which is about a 45-minute drive south, but they were divorced, had to come together and do this. And then they also had the meeting with David's brother, Dan Jr., and David's sister, Allison. So I think before this time there was lots of phone calls back and forth, getting everyone up to date. But this was a nice chance for a sit-down with everyone in person, face-to-face, with these three law enforcement officials and kind of get everyone up to speed, kind of give a level set for everybody so they knew what was up. Is that your take on this as well, Sophia?
I believe so. I mean, as far as we know of, Sidra hadn't been up there until this date. Then we know that they had sat down and met with the family a few days after the bodies were found, but they hadn't met with Sidra. They had only been speaking with her through the telephone, and so I'm guessing lots of phone calls went between the families and trying to make arrangements and stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the strangest things here is that by this time, by March 14th, 2015, at least publicly, both sides of Kamel's family and of David's family are both acting like David is guilty. And like we just talked about, at this point, they don't really have anything yet. So that was another weird thing. It's like, are they just very trusting to what the cops are saying? Are they very sheltered and not really understanding that there really hasn't been anything yet? Are they told not to dig? I mean, why do we have so many people, including Kamel's family and David's family, and then all of these goons and all these people that claim to be David's friends? Why are they all saying that David is guilty when, as we've just pointed out, they don't have anything back yet? So that's my question. We also have Stephen here joining us too.
Oh, hey guys! I'm sorry I was late. I've been busy. How you doing? I'm listening in. Yeah, there's agendas. The police are intimidating to most people. Even myself, as a former cop, I don't like talking to cops because it is intimidating. It's we used to look for always the bad things, but also what's going on there. People were directed.
Yeah, so everyone was, agreeing with the official narrative, basically walking lockstep with what the police were saying, whether it was the news, the media, the reports we saw in the online articles about this case, the justice page, the folks there was, there's only a handful of us that were, saying that something doesn't add up here. But, we kept getting that backlash from those folks who were saying, why would you doubt the police? You think there's some kind of a cover-up, or why are you thinking that way? Are you guys conspiracy theorists? Things like that. That's some of the backlash that we got from the normal folks that just joined the page, over and above the gray state guys that were pushing to make sure that everyone did believe a certain narrative, rather than just say, "Hey, come to your own conclusion." They were demanding that we are nut jobs, and you have got to believe the police version. So this is 2 months in, and you're right. Everyone here gets a chance to meet. They all sit down, they go through, and they kind of say, "Here's what happened. Here's what happened." But as Greg points out, there's 5 or 6 things here that hadn't even come. None of the testing had come back. So it raises the antenna.
And that's what I find so interesting about this case, is that the friends immediately believe the worst in David. And are they convincing the family to believe that immediately? Or was it the police? I mean, we hear nothing from the family. There's no interviews, nothing. The only time we hear anything is from when they are in the documentary, and that's only David's side of the family. So we have no idea what they're thinking at this moment, and if they immediately believe the worst, or if they had to be convinced. Everything's such a mystery when it comes to this case and the families. And it would be nice to know if they had to be convinced or if they were just willing to believe the worst. I mean, it would be sad if that's what happened.
Yeah, one of the things I mentioned in the first article that I wrote, and this was like 9 months later after the killings, bodies were found, is I said it was surprising that there wasn't a statement released from the family, an interview, a press release, a conference, here's the family coming together and it's this awful thing, and here's our thoughts, and here's what we would like the public to do. Nothing came out. So everyone was confused because there were no answers, and the only answers we had was just some just details of the case and then assumptions of what happened, and then it dropped off. There was nothing in the media weeks after this happened. Now we're talking two months later. This had already been down the memory hole here locally in the state of Minnesota. No one was talking about this case at this point. It dropped right off the radar altogether. So like I said, none of these results were back. The contents, the Dropbox, And so the investigation really hadn't started yet. The basic cursory things that they saw were all took place, and of course you're going to look at a scene like that and assume various things like they did. But it sounds once again that they had already their minds made up, and they were waiting for these reports to come in just as a formality to be able to close down the case. Is how I took it. They weren't waiting to say, "Hey, let's dig into this and let's really find out what was going on." Their comments were, "Well, when those reports come in, we'll review them and add them to the file, and it's not going to change anything, but we have to go through a checklist to complete everything." So, very interesting.
Don't you think that they would have reviewed those files and said, "Hey, things aren't adding up to our official narrative"? Or did they just look at it, say, "Yep, we received it," and stuck it into the database?
Well, I think they would have reviewed it, but it may have been just a cursory look at it. Maybe Stephen can answer a little more on this too, but I don't think they dug in like what we did and analyzed every page of every single document and then started cross-referencing and finding out that things didn't match relating to phone records, bills like that, text records, and the cross-referencing of where people were when they said things, what they were doing, and you find out later that these the phone records and such didn't match up. In fact, they were wrong. And so I know for a fact that none of that was cross-referenced at all. We were the only ones to do that section, to that piece.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. And let me answer that. I'll digress, just going back a step on that last thing you were going on. There's three things with law enforcement. It's, laziness, experience, and they don't have that kind of experience in this case, or an agenda inside or outside. As a PI, and I work in cases now where we do find things like that, so it's one of those three. But going back to digress a little bit with the family, and dealing with the Carringtons, the Yosemite case, and then also I dealt with Chandra Levy's case for a short time, is that unless the family is guided, almost you need a public relations person in a big case to guide you and say, come forward. And we don't believe the police agenda, and we don't believe our son did this savage, suicide murder thing. And so I've seen that where Mr. Carrington had to have the Levys when Chandra was murdered in D.C., and I remember meeting with the Levys in Modesto, and he told Carrington just told him, you have to get out there and get in front of the camera. And so, they believe the agenda or not, but, if they didn't, they should have stood up there and go, our son didn't do this,
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a kind of that's, and they do believe the cops, and they trust the cops, and they should trust the cops. But, this situation, no, absolutely not. This thing's terrible.
Well, Stephen,
go ahead.
Just one quick thing. For Stephen's book, that when I was reading your book, Stephen, that was one of the things that I was looking at. I was like, well, there's a big difference in the way that the families in the case that you were covering in your book. There's a big difference in the way that the families were as opposed to this. And I know we're going to take a deeper dive into some of those differences and stuff, but there was a lot of things like that really stuck out to me. It's like, wow, the family was not acting, I don't know.
Well, I remember Mr. Carrington met with Mr. Levy, and Mr. Carrington told me he went over to the house when this big case hit for the Levy family, and he said, man, get up. He was crying, he's a Jewish man. He was just totally in mourning for his daughter. And Mr. Carrington really, had to stand him up. And he's like, hey, man, this is a big thing. You have to, revenge this, and, for the sake of your daughter and blah, 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 and whatever you need. And so it didn't happen in vain. And it took Mr. Carrington to stand him up, And I've seen these people in the most tragic situations be strong, in which I would just probably would have cashed it in myself, maybe. Who knows? So you're right, Greg. And I think you guys are getting at that with David's family. Maybe, come on, there's got to be some suspicion. Even the brother. Somebody to step up or say something on behalf of David.
And they still could. They still could at any time.
Oh, sure.
They can help us.
Absolutely. And that, if it comes to people getting involved in things we've talked about, that they feel secure. They might come forward, maybe,
Yeah, there was no vigil held or an announcement of the memorial service or things we can do. What can the public do? There was no coming together of the family, and I think that also lends to the fact that they weren't as close as what many say. This is Dan and Kate now, the divorced parents of David. This I think leads one to go down that road too. That things weren't all on the up and up, or good. Honky-dory, I should say, between the two. Of course, they got along, but it kind of exposed the fact that they didn't come together and do a joint press conference, a joint release, something, that you usually get the crying parents in front of the microphone kind of a thing, and asking for the, support and come forward and, do a vigil or something. There was nothing like that.
What about short memorials, crosses, flowers, things like that on the front lawn? How much of that was there? For like a child or anything, Nothing.
No, there was nothing. There was someone set a teddy bear or some flowers on the front steps, but this is a little 5-year-old girl that was killed, usually in Minnesota.
Oh,
here.
Yeah.
That's a big
God,
thing.
The whole town
of support. The town kind of shuts down. They rope it off, and they have a memorial. There's candles, vigils. There's things, people talking about memories, standing in the front yard. And there's always a big gathering of people. Here was very quiet, and nothing happened, nothing was said, nothing was mentioned. And the crime scene tape was taken down, and it was opened up again, and the house, and I don't think there was many, people were driving by, I think, looking, the neighbors said, at the house and at the home, but there was no big outpouring of, support from family, neighbors, and everything else, because we had this awkward murder-suicide.
Sure.
Who are you going to support? What do you... there could have been something for Rania, because she's obviously the victim in this case.
Oh, yeah.
So there was nothing even for her.
Yeah.
Stuffed animals,
Yep. No, and nothing interviewing other, families of kids her age, or, this is terrible. We knew the child went to, kindergarten with our kid. Dan, it's
nothing
right. It's totally right on it.
At her kindergarten school, I don't think did anything.
That's what I mean. This thing
it was very odd to begin with.
You know what? Yeah, you're principal of the school she went to. You don't think you're going to do something? Bret Hart with the Marshall case, he did a big thing, right, Greg? Dan, you guys know about that. I mean,
the football field, that big thing. Release all these balloons and.
Oh my God! You saw it.
Tournament. They had a cat run.
Yep, the whole thing, man. You know what? Yep, they did. And see, that's you guys are right on. It's just, and it's the same sad kind of case. There's children that have been killed. And why? And this is America. This is not, somewhere else. This is how we do it here.
And the other thing, Greg, I think that
Dan, you were there when you were at something, and you saw that they were claiming that Rania was a victim of domestic abuse or something, or a victim of domestic violence. Domestic violence. It was an event to help raise awareness for domestic violence, and they showed a slideshow at the end of the presentation of all the various children in the that passed away or were killed that year, in that calendar year, I think 2015. And at the very beginning, they went in chronological order, is where we saw the Rania and Kamel, and it showed a big photo of victims of domestic abuse. And that's when I talked to the presentation person after the fact, just to say, that case isn't over yet. We don't know what happened. You can't really claim it was domestic abuse. It could have been, certainly could have been, but not enough to include in a presentation like that as an official statement, because that's what people think. That's one more thing ingraining in people's minds. They're solidifying it, and I took exception to that because it certainly was not a domestic abuse case, for God's sakes. Greg, the last thing I was going to say before I move on is, it gets here to the point where you were emailing and I think calling, asking for updates from these guys, Detective Bowen or whatnot, and they're getting back to you saying, we don't have it, we'll get it, we'll let you know when we get it. Did it almost seem like that it was an inconvenience to them that you kept kind of knocking on the door, asking for things, and they were thinking like, what's all the hurry, what's all the rush about all this? There's nothing here in this case, so why are people interested? Especially this guy named, Greg. He keeps contacting us. Did you ever get that feeling that they're trying to just placate you and get this stuff in so they can kind of check, get you off their list as well as getting the reports closed and finalized? Or were they actually? Did you get a sense that they were, excited to get it as well,
to dive in and take a look at it, or was it more of let's get this report so these freaks stop contacting us? How did that feel?
That's a great question. I got the sense at that point, because I had asked them, once the case is closed, will you give us some type of statement? Will you give us something? And since Gummert said yes, I was very hopeful. And I was actually very, very, very hopeful that they would prove David Crowley guilty. And so that's what I was hoping for. That's all that I wanted. That's all that I was asking for. Hey,
because you at the same time was looking for closure. Yeah, because up until then there was no closure on any of this. So you were excited for it as well. And like you said, in either direction, if they had proof that David did it, I want to see that, because then we can shut our page down, shut down the justice group, and move on with our lives. We were also looking for that evidence. And so when that never came, and then we did get the evidence, and it was not what they said, that's why we're still here 6 years ago. All right, should I continue with the next paragraph?
Yeah, please.
All right, so then it says, on April 24th, Detective Bone received and began to review the contents of David's Dropbox account. Now, this is an online cloud storage, for those not familiar with it. He says, I started to review the data contained on the Dropbox flash drive, wrote Detective Bone. The data appears similar to some of the data that Detective Klokonos has found when reviewing the contents of the Crowley's phones, tablets, and computers. And so what this alludes to here, I think, to summarize for the listeners, is they got the access from Dropbox to get David's info. They downloaded it to a USB jump drive and mailed it to the Apple Valley Police Department. Is that correct, Stephen? And so, but it was April 24th before he actually physically received that in the mail. Is that how it goes?
I believe so.
So, okay, so they got it, and they started reviewing it there, and he said by quick looking at it, it appears to be similar to some of the stuff that they found when, dealing with the other things. And so that was very similar. Then it says, by May 5th, Detective Bone had fully reviewed the Dropbox files. He says, the information I found on the USB drive was old data containing information about David Crowley's businesses and the projects he was working on. I did not, quote, I did not find anything of pertinent value to this case on these files, end quote. Anything there to review?
They found nothing.
What does he mean by this case? I mean, does he look at this case as a suicide, homicide, or homicide, or I mean, what was he looking at that would have sparked his interest in another direction? He might have been.
If they would have found, files on maybe unfaithful marriage or something, files in there that he was cheating or she was cheating, or files in there saying, you know what, my businesses aren't going too well. I'm thinking of ending it all. Suicidal type messages in there. And I think that's the kind of thing they were looking for. What kind of motive? And he just saw probably tons and tons of gray state files and photos and pictures and family-related stuff. And business-related stuff, just normal things is what he found.
Get his searches. Get all his searches, too, Get the searches. Get the URLs as many as you can. History, if he's cleaning it up with CC Cleaner. Get custodial records. Google. Yeah. They got to release stuff from certain cases and whatever it is and see what he was searching for. I mean, most people that are going to do something as radical, which he didn't do, but if he was to do it, would be they look stuff up. Like the gals that poisoned the old man, they were looking up how much cyanide do I need. There's something there. They don't go to the library anymore. So I mean, searches are huge. I would have looked at the searches almost. I would have had somebody look at the searches totally. Something there. I mean, whatever.
And that I think they would have done with they had the laptop, so that would have been given to the Dakota County Electronic Crimes Task Force, right, to be able to do that. And that also would have been Klokonos who was handling that. So he's saying basically here the files that he's looking at from this jump drive were very similar to what they found on the laptop. And with those two things combined, they found really nothing that stuck out regarding anything. Mm-hmm. Motive.
Right.
I think it looks like the result was they just found what a normal young father running a business would have on his laptop, on his online cloud storage. It was nothing jumped out. And so now the next paragraph it gets to be interesting.
Let me say one thing, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead.
the way that Stephen, the way that you phrase us, where you're talking about this case, that's something I haven't really thought of too much, because yes, at this point, this case is not about whether David Crowley did it or not. This case is about looking for anything that would help them show that David Crowley did this, right? So when they say that they didn't find anything of pertinent value to this case, if they were still open to the question of David didn't do this, that would be all this would be pertinent to this case.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
You kind of reverse directions a little bit, but don't totally go off the map and say, well, there's just going to be something that just sparks. I don't know, and it's not going to be like, hey, how do you kill yourself and your family? And it's Googled 4 times last year. It doesn't work that way. It's other things like that. But we know that he didn't do it, and it's just, there's nothing more I can say about that at this time.
But they're also looking for things that would substantiate and beef up their own narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not find anything to beef up their own narrative.
So it's basically nothing pertinent. Plausible deniability, and that stretches it all the way across for them. We don't see it, smell it, hear it. It ain't there. We have no witness. And the fact is that after learning this today about no memorials on the lawn and everything else, and there's no public reactions or fundraisers or vigils, it just tells me more being this thing is totally controlled. Listen, Danny Mason and all these guys, or whoever we think, or whoever's involved, we don't know who's involved, but the guys that seem to stick out to me personally, I'm saying this myself, is that they got away with everything else, going in the house, everything else. Nobody knows about it. The media's not covering it. The family's not questioning it. It's a lot bigger than those guys, or whomever went in there.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. The very next paragraph is where the tide turns a little bit. He says, quote, "I did locate a journal," Detective Bone continued, "which appears to be authored by David. The latest dated journal was dated September 10th, 2014 at 21:07 hours. After looking through the journal entries, Detective Bone, quote, "did not find any indications of what may have led to this incident." And he continues and says, "As of this time," Detective Bowen concluded on May 5th, 2015, "I do not have any information about what may have led to David shooting Kamel and Rania and then committing suicide." Detective Klokonos still has the computer forensics that need to be completed as part of this investigation. The case will remain active until all computers, phones, hard drives are able to be processed for potential evidence of what caused this incident to happen, end quote. Now, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
You want to start with this one,
with a broad brush.
Stephen or Sophia?
Once again, there's no proof. There's nothing backing up their motive and their official narrative. And so I'm just baffled at the fact that they can still continue to say that it was a murder-suicide. Everything that they had thought in the beginning, like that it was a financial reason for David to commit murder-suicide. Well, they got the finances back, and there was no proof of that. And then they thought, well, it was drugs. And they get the talk screen back, and there's no proof of that. Everything's been knocked out. But yet they continue to stick with their official narrative.
Exactly. It's all about the motive is very, very fuzzy. You can't find it. There's no motive from David doing this. The motive is coming from somewhere else.
Correct.
Yeah, these journals, right? These journals were supposed to give us something, and there's nothing in any of these journals. Yeah. This is the journal that they're mentioning. If they're mentioning it, then it's pertinent to their case. But they once again, nothing in there. That was a big thing, because we had heard about journals, and there's supposed to be stuff in these journals that made David Crowley look guilty. So we have some major problems here when they say that they located this journal. The journal ended on September 10th, 2014, it's just not relevant. Any questions or anything, any accusations regarding the journal, any journals or anything like that, to me just don't seem relevant to this case at that point.
Now, I could see a journal or a diary or something leading up to the acts of a person that's suicidal. Yes, those previous days leading up to it could tell a lot about their mindset. Even a week or two. This is for months almost.
Well, if you watch the Sloppymentary, they make it sound like the journals ended on December 24th, right before, and then David killed everybody. But that's not true. You know,
David's father said that on the documentary. The very last entry was Christmas morning or Christmas Eve morning or something. And so this is completely different from what they say here, using the actual date and timestamp. And so once again, there's more discrepancies in
that was
the journals.
Literally a script, because he even flipped it over after reading that last part, and he was like, "Oh, there's nothing else."
Yeah, if there was anything in these journals, the cops would have used this to try to prove their case. They would have made a big deal about it.
They would have said, "Here's the smoking gun. Here's our answer. Case closed. Done deal."
But, you know, let me say something, guys. As myself, an author, an aspiring TV kind of guy, and writing stuff, and I'm not a poet, but David was an artist, and there would have been things written down, or he's not just he just didn't pull the trigger if he did or not, and he didn't. It's that it would have been more flamboyant, would have been a romance to the, if that's the right term, to him. If he's going to take his family out, he's going to say some things. You know what I mean? And being an artist, I mean, he's a creator, man. He's a writer.
Yeah.
So it would have been much more. It's like a poet going out. I mean, look what Hemingway wrote. And before he went, same thing. You don't want to go out like screw everybody. You got to say, hey, I'm really sorry. This is really something elaborate, more so. I think.
Yeah, I've been saying that for years.
Oh,
like he would have left proof.
I know. And then he would have said, "Oh my God, he was." And then, he was. Yeah, but that's what it takes a motive out of it right there. He had no motive.
I mean, there's a guy. He documents himself exercising. He documents himself playing video games, and his daughter having a meltdown, which I'm guilty of recording Carter having meltdown. So,
hey, listen, Sophia, that's a great point. You know what? If I was him, and I'm saying if not, he would have put himself on the camera. You know that? That's what he would have put himself on camera. He would have said, "This is it." I mean, look at Hunter S. Thompson's last 24 hours. Okay, pull it up. And Johnny, there's a lot of good interviews. Same kind of thing. They kind of knew he was going to go out. Not quite that way, but it was not a celebration. But I'm saying is that he would have videotaped himself. I think. And I think you just brought up a great point, Sophia.
Oh, thank you.
He would have spoke to the camera. Yeah.
And I do have a question, but it's regarding the crime scene and what the police have written in the police report. And what they're saying is that there's no evidence of a struggle, no evidence of a break-in, so the only person who could have done it was David. But that living room was chaotic, and the back slider was partially open. Well, a fourth of an inch open. I mean, how can they get away with saying that?
Well, anybody can get a key. Okay, one of his friends could have copied a key too. I mean, it's stupid. They got away with what they're saying, but it doesn't fit the agenda for any kind of. They're just trying to cover it. This wasn't a forced entry, so that means nobody else did it. Okay, nobody forced themselves in there. Oh yeah, really? The back door's open. I don't think so. And in this situation, they wouldn't leave the back door open when they left anyway. You don't want the dog running out bloody. Number one. Number two is that it'll keep the smell in there if something happens. Number three is that the door's open in the winter. That's suspicious. Somebody's going to go in there eventually. So that kind of So they would have. We killed 3 people. Now we're going to make sure the dog's okay. Hopefully, make sure he gets air. It doesn't match. That doesn't go like that.
Well, does every murder scene show proof of a struggle? Because they're making it seem like because there's no. And that's what I was thinking too, because I've watched several docuseries in the past week, and one of them, there is no proof of a struggle. The woman just fell down the stairs and there's blood in the stairwell, and he got charged with murder. Well, the docuseries leads you down the road of the guy being innocent, but then when you go to read the autopsy report, it's pretty clear that she was murdered. But there's no signs of a struggle though. And
the thing is that with the Marshall case, the two kids were sitting on the couch. There was no struggle. They were shot. And Philip was shot also. But here, you're in your family home. You're not going to be jumpy about anything. So you just can come up to somebody. There's no struggle. Shoot somebody. There doesn't need to be a struggle. So I think that's kind of, and even with that scene being really messy, it'd be hard to kind of show a struggle. I go with Catherine though, with the blunt force trauma to the head, like I think we do on David. But no struggle with the family.
I mean, if you're surprised, then you don't have a gun to defend yourself.
Right.
And that other person does. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Who's going to fight?
Yeah. I mean, but they'll mention it. They say that's just one of the narratives. Is no sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry, no sign of this or that, and that they can change that later. It's just that's initial observation.
Well, thank you for answering that because it's been bugging me.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, sorry, we got a little off topic. Well, not actually because it's going to cover it further down, but we jumped ahead.
So it says they find this journal, and he says it appears to be authored by David. So this, to me, looks like possibly a Microsoft Word file on the Dropbox that was saved, and there were some notes and dates in there of things that were happening. Does this relate to the Day One online journal that they allegedly found for David as well? Or is this the same thing, or is this a different journal? This appears to be like a Word document or something, an actual file on Dropbox. Not a link to a website. Or is it? Greg, is this the same one? He used the online journal called Day One for writing a diary. Is this what they're alluding to, that this could be?
That was my understanding, yes. This is what they're talking about, so this was the final one.
This is the USB flash drive that was given to Detective Bone of the contents of a Dropbox account. Now, contents is like just the contents of a file folder. So these are documents. These aren't websites. These aren't web links. These are just files. So like I said, I'm thinking like this would have been a Microsoft Word or something,
Oh, I see what you're
jotting
saying.
down this kind of stuff. Not a Dropbox. The journal would have been found maybe on a website going back to the favorites or bookmarks in a web browser. The Day One journal would have been more found in that capacity versus the contents of a file folder that were saved to the cloud.
Correct.
So they didn't even have a name on it. He just said it looks like this was David's in authoring this file. We don't even know who put this together. Maybe it will come up
if it's in
later
Dropbox,
too.
Right? If it's in Dropbox, there's probably files that have been backed up from his computer or something like that, right?
It's also a phone app that you can download, and you can actually go back and edit it.
Oh, interesting.
I had downloaded it and done that.
Right. So just because this is what they found in the Dropbox doesn't necessarily mean that it's the latest. This is just the latest one that was backed up to his Dropbox account, possibly, right?
But it also could be updated or edited or corrected or changed. Could it not?
Yes, it can be.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. So even as of May 5th of 2015, he doesn't have any information what led, no motive, no suicide, and then he goes on to say that there's still some forensics to be done from the computer that'll be completed as well. And he goes on to say that the case is active. Okay, that makes sense. And it'll be closed once they get everything done. And so that makes sense also. But here again, nothing that shows potential evidence of what caused the accident, this incident, to happen at all. So they're still scratching their heads thinking there's no motive yet. And they've already got the case closed, essentially, just not officially. But they can't find anything to help back it up or help support their theory, which is all this is a theory. Yeah, that's a lot to take in here. And so far, everything that Detective Klokonos said, he's part of that electronic crimes task force. They couldn't find anything on the laptops or the phones or the tablets. And now they get the Dropbox, nothing there either. So they're spinning their wheels, going in circles without really finding anything to support their theory.